an amazing amount of creativity of lots of different forms of art, from wood, painting and pottery, which is a vast range of different kinds of skills, which is fascinating.
Ivan, he was an inspirational man. If you take a look around, you can just see how prolific he was as an artist, and he just left such a legacy. It just goes to show how passionate he was about his work, how fond of him everyone was.
Well, for Ivan, I don't think there were enough hours in the day. I don't understand how he managed to do so much in just 24 hours per day. I'm bowled over by the variety and the talent that he showed.
So creative, wonderful passion for life, lovely man, such fun to be with.
He was an everyman character because there was no one facet to him. He was multifaceted, and I think it was just his enthusiasm, his zest for life and his ability to gather people together.
He always had such a welcome on his face. I never met him without feeling a warm attraction to him, because that's the kind of man he was. He was a very warm and loving man, wasn't he?
He gave me piano lessons when I was 10, and we both gave up on it when I was 11, because neither of us had the patience. But he taught me to read music, and music has been a part of my life. This room here, we would have Christmas dinner in here, and it was just alive. That room there was the party room, and I have known people go to sleep under the grand piano, and they had the family string quartet.
Ivan we knew for years because we used to work with Jonathan, and Ivan and Beth came. I do musical holidays, and Ivan and Beth came with us, and he was always great company. Always lots of characters. Sometimes got lost.
And I remember walking in and just not knowing where to look, because everywhere I looked there was a sculpture, a painting, a piece of ceramic, and then the grand piano, and it was just really special. I don't think I'll ever forget those moments. But also coming to play piano duets with him as well. When I first came to Ivan's house, I was invited along to sing madrigals.
Now is the month of May, when merry lads are playing. Fa la 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 la, fa la 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 la. Now is the month of May, when merry lads are playing. Fa la 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 la, fa la 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 la. Each with his bonny lass upon the greeny grass. Fa la 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 la, fa la 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 la. Each with his bonny lass upon the greeny grass. La 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 la.
The art was always there to be admired. The house was full of Ivan, with the paintings, the sculptures, the pottery. But it was the fun and that went on. Sometimes there was serious fun for Ivan, where he would have the madrigals, and then we would have readings, and sometimes there were serious readings, or sometimes there'd be comic readings.
That was one of Ivan's favourites.
Ivan had been evacuated to Audley when he was about 13 or 14, when a bomb had dropped in Chesterton. A solitary plane looking for ROF, Radway Green, saw lights of the cinema, which was known as Maggie's, and the lights of the Corona work, and dropped the bomb. And Ivan's parents' house was damaged and they couldn't live in it anymore. So that was how Ivan moved to Audley as a young man. Well, I first met Ivan when I was a young teacher, Miss Steele, new from college, taking up my very first appointment at Halmer End Secondary Modern School near Audley in North Staffordshire. Ivan was already established there, and I soon got to know Ivan and his family, his dear wife Beth, and the young children, Janet, Bronwyn and Jonathan. And the friendship developed, although we had very different approaches to the job we were doing. Ivan was very free thinking, and I really don't know to this day whether he'd like to be called an atheist or an agnostic. And I'd gone there to teach religious education, which in those days was Old Testament and New Testament. That didn't matter because we had so much in common, and it lasted throughout the years. I wasn't at that school long, only about 2 years and a term. Ivan stayed for the whole of his career, and his commitment to education and to that community was very remarkable. And it had a disappointment because he used to have a choir and an orchestra, and the head who came finished it all. He ceased the choir. And so Ivan did more artwork, and he had his own room, and he used to work happily in there and inspired a lot of pupils. At the same time, he ran the Evening Institute, which was very innovative in the area in the 1960s. And he had classes that people hadn't thought of. In chapels in an afternoon, there would be artwork, or there would be dressmaking, and there would be Keep Fit and PT it was called. And he did a lot of work in the area.
I remember Ivan. He taught me at school, taught music and art. A lovely, lovely man.
Mr. Price, as he was known to his students, was one of only 2 proactive teachers at Halmer End Secondary Modern School in the academic year of 1979-1980 who pushed to introduce O-level rather than CSE qualifications. This was unheard of at the time, but he promoted and supported a very small group of pupils to study and pass O-level art. He did this extra work whilst running the CSE course alongside. My husband and I were part of the group. Ivan took us on trips to London, where we visited the Tate Gallery, amongst other places. His enthusiasm was infectious, and as 15-year-olds it opened our eyes and hearts to a little bit of culture. He also prepared us well for our coursework by organising a visit to a local art college to see and discuss O-level submissions. By investing in our education above the standard requirements of the day, Ivan gave us confidence to enter the adult world on an equal footing to other school leavers from more prestigious educational establishments. We have fond memories of his art class and lessons. I can picture his classroom now, filled with paintings and sculptures, pottery and Swiss cheese plants.
We grew up in this house. It always smelt of oil paints, and Dad was always painting, but it was just part of life, and when you're a child you don't take much notice of these things. But seeing the volume of work, I mean, we found 50 paintings just in the garage that we hadn't seen for years or never. We thought, we can't just disperse this. What are we going to do with it? And we knew that Dad had done various small exhibitions during his life. He exhibited for many years with Penkle Festival. He was also a member of North Staffordshire Artists. But he never did a sort of one-man show. I think the biggest one he did was a joint show with June Burnett, and that was at Keele University, probably in the 80s, I think, after he'd done his MA with Keele. And we thought, actually, we've got the space. Why don't we just put it all together? You know, this is going to be a one-off, one only chance. And because the house is also part of Dad's creation, he did very original things with the built-in furniture and things. We thought it's the ideal space to showcase his life's work.
So we're in the living room of Birch House, which was Mum and Dad's house for 60 years actually. They moved here in 63, and they were very much children of the 60s really. Dad was very into art and design, and he remodelled the house really in terms of the 60s, so put in huge picture windows, glass doors. He wanted light and space, and he rebuilt the house himself pretty much from scratch. He was an artist, so we've put together this exhibition really of his life's work, probably about 200 paintings and sculptures and hundreds of ceramics, probably about 300 or 400 ceramics. And Dad died last year, so this is assembled here probably for the one and only time, and we're just delighted to be able to show you around. So this room is flowers, as you can probably see. Something Dad came to towards the end of his life, really. He always loved plants and gardens, and in a way he calmed down as he got older, and in the last sort of 20 years or so, he loved to paint flowers from the garden.
Ivan spent most of his last few years in this room looking out of the window at the garden. When he hadn't got the energy to work in the garden, he would paint pictures of the flowers from photographs he'd taken, and he had a particular love for the deep blues of delphiniums and other blue flowers. He was very fond of Himalayan poppies. There's a lot of examples of those. Quite difficult to grow, but he did it very successfully, and they were a favourite. So, as I say, he'd just sit in his armchair looking out at the garden, and it was his joy. He was very much an outdoor person. We'd always had youth hosteling holidays where we spent a lot of time out of doors with rocks, trees, water and flowers, and that's where he felt most at home.
So this is the room that Dad christened the studio. He built in these easels, as you can see. It's a good room to see his built-in furniture. He built the desk, he built all the cupboards and shelves, and he made this oval table to his own design. We later reclaimed it as a dining room, but it was originally the studio. So we've made this room over to paintings with water, big wave painting. He did 4 or 5 6x4 foot paintings, not on canvas, just on large pieces of hardboard, which was cheap and easy to get hold of. The earliest painting here is one of North Wales. It's Llanwynadl on the Llyn Peninsula, where we went as a family when we were very small. And it's a lovely, lovely painting of a rock pool with Beth, my mum, and us children looking for little crabs and things like that. So again, water was something he came back to throughout his life. We've got waterfalls here, little pools in the roaches, which was also a favourite haunt.
Some of the earlier paintings also included local places. So this one is the pool at Bethley, where we walked off, and we'd either cycle out there or get a bus and then walk. We didn't have a car for many years. That one is 3 Shires Head, which is in the Roaches, and I remember falling into the water there when I was about 4 and desperately trying to swim.
There's also a lot of the ceramics in this room. Dad made ceramics both as artworks but also for practical use, so he made all the plates and bowls that we ate from. He made all the mugs, and we've got whole sets of plates here. One thing about Dad's art, he was a real Renaissance man. He'd have a go at absolutely everything. I mean, he was a musician as well. We'll come to that later. But we've got turned bowls there. So he acquired an old lathe from a friend, Alan May, and he started to turn these beautiful wooden bowls. And whatever he turned his hand to, he made a pretty good job of making beautiful things.
So you'll see a recurrence of the apple theme that he used in a lot of his ceramics. That was one he was very fond of, and a lot of plates and things use that theme. He used very natural forms based on sort of perhaps trees, fractal patterns, water, that kind of thing. So that really is integrated in most of the designs.
We're now in the room that was the music room. Dad was also a very keen musician. He studied the piano to diploma level and had aspirations to become a pianist at one time, before he became an artist actually. So there was a Broadwood grand piano over there, there was an upright piano there were guitars, there were lutes. Again, in terms of music, Dad was not a specialist. He was a generalist. He played the lute, played the piano, and also he formed his own madrigal group and sang in that. So he liked to do a bit of everything.
Music was a huge part of my father's life, all his life, from a tiny child. His family were of Welsh and Scottish heritage. They celebrated New Year. His mother and her sisters would sing in the Salvation Army band and go around the streets on festivals and holidays. My grandmother played the tambourine, I particularly remember. And his mother was the eldest of 13 children, so it was a big family. One of her brothers played the accordion, so it was a beautiful little squeeze box that I remember my great Uncle Jack playing for family get-togethers, and music was part of his life for forever, really. He and his sister were taught piano, and one of my father's best stories was when he'd just finished his piano practice during the war, and a bomb fell on the next street, Heathcote Street in Chesterton, and all the windows blew out, and he would have been quite badly injured as he'd been still at the piano. But they had to move. That was the time that they had to move, and so they came to Bignall End. So music remained part of his life. He was a very talented pianist. When he was in his teens, he took his diploma, Associate of the Trinity College in London. And after that, when he moved to Bignall End, very soon after, he met my mum, and they became firm friends, and then started courting. And when he told his piano teacher that he was getting married, she was extremely annoyed and said, "Well, that's it, you'll never be a concert pianist now." So this is one of Dad's favourite stories again. But this was the music room, so we had 2 pianos in here, so we could play 2 piano duets, and we learnt the piano. Dad taught all of us piano, and then my brother learnt the cello, my sister played violin, and I played the flute. My brother-in-law also played guitar, my sister's husband, who was a talented classical guitarist. So here we have some pottery sculptures, which Dad did not do a lot of, but we have a lovely cellist, a guitarist, a couple more there. And this is rather beautiful. It's a pottery flute. So the cellist is Jonathan, the youngest of Ivan's 3 children. Jan played the violin, she's the eldest. I played the flute, I'm the one in the middle. And Evan, our brother-in-law, played classical guitar.
So this is Ivan's portrait of a musical group that I played in, Musical Offering, a Baroque music group. And we put on a little festival locally. This one was in St Margaret's Church, Bethley.
The flautist was actually given to me because I played the flute, and she's up here because there wasn't really a good space for her in the music room amongst all the others. She's too tall for the shelves and too small for the floor, so this is a lovely place to display her.
Probably the single type of painting which Dad specialised in the most. He's probably about 30 examples in here of the mandala. I could probably read to you in Dad's own words a little thing he said about the mandala: a contemplative design which recurs in many world mythologies, based on a circle or a square enclosing a special or sacred space with the viewer in the centre. Lines leading in or out may indicate pathways to self-discovery. So that was a sort of spiritual idea that Dad related to very strongly, and these paintings are the result. I think let Bron say a little bit about the sculptures in here, perhaps.
The other thing we've got in this room is several of Dad's big wooden sculptures, and he was very interested in the form of the wood itself, the grain, the way. He always said the sculpture started with the piece of wood. He would find out what the grain was like, what it wanted to do, and then he would work from that. Having said that, some of them ended up very complex. A particular thing he loved doing was the making Mobius strip, which is like a ribbon with one twist in it and the 2 ends joined, so that the sculpture has one surface and one edge, and if you put your finger on and trace it around, you just get one edge and one surface. And the more complex ones, he did 2 Mobius strips joined into an interlocking loop. And those are one of his really popular sculptures. He gave several away as wedding presents, and people were very impressed with that. A lot of skill involved. There's a very big one over there, which is the musician piece, which is actually two movable interlocking loops. But this one can be arranged, it can be hung, it can be moved around, and you can arrange it any way you like. Dad also had one or two little pieces that he called touch sculptures, and they just have a form that is lovely to hold in the hand, very compact, very natural. This piece is called Vegetarian Bull, and it was used as a plant stand. This one is definitely a flying creature. I don't know if it's got an actual name, but you can see the beautiful wings here, and it's actually mobile. It will rotate on the base. He loved wood. When the Methodist chapel just down the road was demolished, he found that the builders, the people who were destroying it, were burning all the timber on site. They weren't going to go to the expense of carrying it away. So he stopped them doing it. He asked them to put it all on one side, and he went down with his wheelbarrow, piece by piece. He carted it up through the back gate and into the garden, stored it in his workshop. It was all beautiful, seasoned, old pitch pine, and it has a heavy, highly coloured grain. The kitchen's a lovely example of how my dad used all the pitch pine that he retrieved and salvaged from the old Methodist chapel down the road when it was being demolished. All this is original panelling that he used for the cupboards that's taken from the chapel. He made the handles on these units by hand, and they were just carved and polished by hand. So we've got the drawers and doors there, and a beautiful little serving tray there.
Ivan created quite a lot of pieces of furniture for this house. So here we have another example of the oval table, and this was a one-piece design which he devised, where the legs and the top of the table are cut out of the same flat piece of wood, so very economical, perhaps a nod to possible mass production. That's where IKEA got the idea, I think. Next to that we have these two three-legged chairs which were modelled on Spanish brutalist chairs. They're a sort of offshoot of Art Deco perhaps, but very interesting and distinctive form, with the sort of hand grips at the side, which are probably necessary to keep you balanced on that rather precarious seat.
This is the largest of Dad's three benches that he made. This one is actually pitch pine as well, and it just had pride of place, so we put the three very biggest pots on it. I'm particularly pleased with the way we decided to arrange this little section, because the colours of the wood, the red clay and the turquoise glaze, and the colours in that picture complement each other perfectly. The three large paintings that Dad did, which are done on 6x4 sheets of hardboard, are quite different. This one here, which we all called Sex, is brushwork, which was quite unusual for Dad. He loved the impasto. He liked to layer it on with palette knives and give it real depth and texture. I remember when I was small, it was absolutely irresistible to go and touch the paint, and sometimes you left a tiny fingerprint because you dented it and it wasn't quite dry. But this one is done with brushes, and it's very detailed and quite different. That is actual brush strokes, whereas here it's tiny little touches of the brush to the canvas to give you texture and shape. The actual shapes here are the shapes of the end of the brush and the bristles. He didn't work the paint onto the canvas. Here it's actually swept in, and he blended the colours actually on the canvas. Instead of mixing and applying it, they were blended in actually while he was creating the painting.
So we ran out of rooms, so the stairs and landing became the setting for Ivan's tree paintings, of which there were quite a few. They range from things he observed. This is a bristlecone pine tree that he saw in the US, a 4,000-year-old tree. There were birch trees. There's a banyan tree with its aerial roots there. So huge variety. It's another particular fascination of Dad's. As we were saying, Dad remodelled the house. He created many artworks, and he also liked to integrate the artworks into the fabric of the house. So here we have on the bathroom door this wonderful abstract, slightly 3D painting, which is very beautiful. And then in the bathroom itself, a mural on a whole wall, which he enjoyed creating. So the combination of art and design were very close to his heart.
I think the integration of art and living daily life was a sort of lifelong passion of my dad's. He was very interested in the Rudolf Steiner education and the fact that children used pots that they'd made and so on. But he also really enjoyed the arts and crafts idea. Have nothing in your houses that you don't know to be useful or believe to be beautiful. Dad was very much, an open-minded and child of the 60s, and he had no hang-ups about sex or representations of it in his art. He didn't really do nude paintings as such, but the symbolism of his forms is often very sexual, and there's a sculpture here particularly, which I think has very, very sexual overtones to it. This piece is actually called Hermaphrodite.
So we're now in a former bedroom devoted to portraits in this exhibition.
I definitely got the most favourable representation in Dad's family portraits, because whereas my brother and sister were good and sat for Dad, I would not sit still, and so in the end he had to do it from a school photograph, so I got the best deal. This one is a little family portrait that Dad did of the 5 of us. So there's Mum and Dad, my elder sister, and myself and Jonathan, all on a windy walk, which was a favourite pastime for the family. These are a few of Dad's abstract forms in pottery. He did a few ceramic sculptures, which were representation of musicians, but also some abstract pieces, besides his wood carving. So this is a few of those. One of them is also a Möbius loop.
And then there's a sort of collage of jazz giants, which included Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong, who were pretty much worshipped by Dad. He was listened to their records over and over again. So this room is devoted to architecture and buildings. Dad was very interested in the structure of buildings and the geometric patterns that they created. Particularly buildings made of wood, I think.
The first one that I have is very impasto and created with palette knife, and actually sometimes just squeezing the paint out of the tube, so the timber has a very thick textured appearance. This one was done more with brushes, and it's much softer in texture but captures the dusty light, the interior atmosphere of the barn in a completely different way.
There's a couple of churches. We've got Strasbourg Cathedral, and then we've got the domed ceiling of a Persian building, a mosque. And some earlier paintings of our former house up the road. Behind me there's a wonderful picture of Chicago, I think based on a photo he took from the top of the Sears Tower. Again, the geometrical shapes that this created was something that Dad was very interested in. Dad did an exchange with an American lecturer at a college in St Paul, and they were there for 6 months, I think, and spent a couple of months travelling around the States.
These 2 pots here would have been done after Dad did his tour of America. I feel that these pots, which were done at about the same time after that trip, have a very architectural sort of structure, and they have lids as well, and if anybody has ever potted, it's very difficult to make a lid and a pot fit after they have been fired, so he was becoming quite talented at his potting by this stage.
There are two examples here of the same painting. It's entitled Man Smoking Picasso, and the first one was quite an early painting which I admired and asked to borrow, but I was having a bit of trouble prizing it out of Dad's hands, and he insisted on painting this copy for me, which I perhaps churlishly refused, saying that I preferred the original, and he eventually lent me the original and kept the copy, which you can see actually if you look at it was unfinished. It was still on the easel when he died. You can see the little white mark at the top where the easel covered the painting. So this room for me is perhaps the climax of the exhibition. It's Dad's abstract work, and much of it was inspired by 20th century artists. So the painting we were in front of perhaps related to Jackson Pollock. It was created by laying the painting flat on the ground, and rather than splashing as Pollock did, he actually poured the paint into the shapes, so it was a bit of his own take, and it's done in this lovely enamel paint which creates a very strong sheen. And other pieces which are again influenced by Dad's American travels. So there's a Navajo sand painting. It's a copy of a original Navajo sand painting which was sort of maps of the desert regions, and Dad created that by covering the painting with sand first of all and painting onto the sand to create a very authentic impression.
Dad was very interested in all forms of ethnic art, and this is a lovely little series of masks here with different names. I think the original ones were less specific, but eventually he designated them as each representing different human emotions. So the painting we have here is definitely one of a kind. It's a collage of all sorts of bits and pieces, either from the house or the garden or the beach. Here we have shavings, curved shavings from when he was making things in his workshop that he then painted. Lots of broken glass. A beautiful sort of simulacrum of a fossil fern leaf there. He loved all sorts of natural forms. We've got a lovely large sculpture here called Sea God, and my brother and I thought it would be nice to display it with a lot of found objects representing the beach, and so it's got shells and pebbles and things around it.
This sculpture is a particularly fine example of Dad's work, I think. We were talking about 20th century inspirations, and perhaps there's a little bit of Henry Moore in this, as there is in some of his stone sculptures. There's a fine stone sculpture in the garden which is a little bit reminiscent of Moore. This he entitled Madonna.
We're very fond of that one. It's obviously an old one. It's got lichen and things growing on it, which makes it even more part of nature, which was what Dad loved. Dad did very little sculpting in sandstone, but it was the only stone he used really, because it's very malleable and you can carve it in any direction. I think later on he found that the hammering, the chiselling was hard on his hands, and because he wanted to preserve his hands for playing the piano and playing the lute, he really wanted to avoid anything that was straining them too much. When Dad came home from his camping holidays, he would often bring pieces of timber, driftwood from the beach, such as this piece here, and he would leave it in its natural state because he thought that the wind and the water had done the sculpture for him. This garden was created by Ivan from 1963 onwards. When we arrived, it was knee-high grass on all the lawns and not much in the way of borders or shrubs. So Dad selected trees. He was an absolute, avid reader of catalogues, nursery catalogues, and very particular in his selections of shrubs and planting. So this has been his life's work, outdoors. So Dad constructed this room particularly to paint in. He never wasted or threw away anything. So the window you see here is actually the old kitchen window. When it was taken out to have the new double glazing in, the old window was used to make Dad's workshop. Some of these paintings here are very early examples of when Dad was really teaching himself to paint in his 20s, in his early 20s. He went to training college after he'd done his national service, which was down the pits as a Bevan boy. And then he went to college for 2 years in Dudley, and that was where he took up art. He'd been a musician previously and gained a piano diploma while he was still in his teens, but the art was something he only came to a little bit later. So some of these paintings are very fragile and starting to flake. He was just learning how to use his materials and experimenting with style and technique at that stage. This little room is where Dad used to do all his painting in the summer. So again, we've got built-in easels, and he also had freestanding easels that he would move around. So this was his outdoor studio. He made it light. He put the plastic in the roof so that he got lots of natural light. In fact, these are some of the oldest and rather tatty paintings, but we found about 50 paintings in the back of the garage when we started clearing out. Some of them we'd never seen before, but some of them are in here. We have collections of natural found objects that Dad used for his teaching. He used skulls, shells, bones, natural things, and all his pupils remember him allowing them to play music. They could bring their Beatles records and play them in their art lessons. Mr. Price's art lessons were for them and about them and their self-expression. It was not him imparting information, but him allowing them to express themselves. And all his pupils remember him with great affection and some funny stories too. Here we have an absolutely super piece. I don't know if it's a caiman or an alligator. One of Dad's pupils in the 60s left school and joined the Foreign Legion. And a few years later, he came back and went to visit Dad at school. He said, "Mr. Price, I brought you something, and it's for your art lessons so that the children can draw it." And he presented him with this stuffed, rather beautiful little reptile. And it would probably be illegal now with all the protection things, but this was back in the 60s and people didn't think anything of it. It was bought abroad and given to Dad as a gift. Dad did live the outdoor life. Most of his holidays were spent outdoors, and he had a series of 3 camper vans which were his mainstay for holidays throughout his life from about 1970-73.
Ivan always had a love of nature. We came to understand this very much. And he fought hard and long to preserve the local countryside. His slogan, as he took the fight to the developers, was "Keep factories off the grass." A legacy we are striving to uphold to this day. In later years, after Andrew and I were married and came to live along Park Lane, we would recognise Ivan's camper van when parked up near our home and know he would be out walking somewhere enjoying the countryside he helped to protect.
It's very interesting that he kept most of his art within his house. He did have an exhibition or 2 at Keele, and sometimes with the North Staffordshire Society of Artists, and I have been to those exhibitions, and but he's put a red sticker on because he didn't want to sell. He's exhibited at the Penkle Festival, but he hasn't really wanted to promote himself. So I think it was a private affair. It's going to sort of a discovery since he died that people want to be able to celebrate it, because as far as I know, apart from fairly isolated exhibitions, he just wanted to get on with it. He couldn't be bothered, I don't think. And then the painting that we were able to have when the family did this wonderful experience of the gallery in Birch House, and I got the jazz painting, is very special because, as I've explained, the jazz came into the friendship a lot. So that's when I got the jazz painting. And of course the Himalayan poppy, because that reminds me of the garden, and Ivan worked very hard. I think you have to put the seeds in the fridge to get the Himalayan poppy, and then once he'd got it, he painted it, and he did several paintings of that. So I'm pleased to have that. So really the art was all round the house, all from different different periods and changed and so on. So it was very much Ivan's creation. We were never short of friends. There were always lots of people who admired Ivan. That's enduring memory of lovely times, really, with music.
Go back to the beginning.
It